Hi, welcome back to the Obvious Choice podcast. Amber and I are alone today without Ren because Ren is at the periodontist, which both of us had to look up because we're not old. Now that we know that it has to do with gum disease, Ren, we hope that your inflamed gums are doing well. And by the time that this episode comes out, I hope that the periodontist has helped you with your inflamed gums. You old man, you. Today's going to be a bit of a grab bag episode. We've got two stories that I want to tell, and both of them bring up topics and will perhaps help you remember topics and important lessons that we hit on reasonably often in this podcast. Because like fitness, business is simple, it's not easy. We often need to be reminded of the most important things over and over again. And one of the best ways to be reminded about something is to hear it a bunch of different ways with a bunch of different stories so that maybe one of them connects and maybe one of them might be something that we come back to. And so the first one has to do with being stuck in a place and comparing ourselves naturally to the other people who are in that place with us, and how that might not be the best thing to do, but how hard it is to look elsewhere if we know that we're going to be stuck in that place. And the second one has to do actually with a great find. It was a local politician where you live, I think, Amber. What's his?
Actually, in North Carolina, it's a different state, but I follow him because he's just a great communicator. So I follow him to study.
So local politician, great communicator, and there was a Reddit post that he put up about fixing the sewage system, or investing a budget into the sewage system. And it brings up a couple really important lessons about how to speak to people, about the importance to speaking to people and what can come out of that. And also something that we've called on this podcast before, the value of just a little bit of demented theater in your business and how important that is. So let's start with the first one. This actually goes way back about 15 years when I was a relatively young personal trainer, and I got referred to me a client through somebody who I coached. So I was a camp counselor for a couple years, like all good Jewish boys from Canada, and then I ran a ball hockey program at this camp, and it was a high level ball hockey program. Yeah, Excalibur, my hockey stick. And it was a high-level ball hockey program. And so a lot of the kids there were actually really, really good hockey players. Like, I don't think any of them ended up making it to the NHL, but, I mean, top-level AAA, definitely played college and stuff. And so one of the kids in there referred to me for personal training. One of his friends. His friend's name is Zach Hyman. So for those of you who don't know who Zach Hyman is, Zach Hyman is on the top line for the Edmonton Oilers. The Edmonton Oilers just made it to the Stanley Cup Finals. Zach Hyman is leading the NHL playoffs in goals with 14. And I think he was second, maybe third in goals in the regular season. I think he had 54 goals this year. And I was his personal trainer when he was 16 years old. Now, to be clear, I take absolutely zero credit for his success. This kid was a mutant. It made no sense how strong and physically aware this kid was. And also, it was for a short time, and it was a long time ago. And I don't remember much about training him. I remember that I did. I trained him and his brother. But Jaden just got a haircut, and he's waving to me out the window, and that's freaking adorable. Hi, Jaden. He has this little Pooh Bear that he's holding.
Aww.
And so the Oilers making the finals felt like a good time to share a conversation that we had together that I'll never forget. And so what I'm about to tell you is a conversation that we had. It's paraphrased. I've probably made up a bunch to fill in the gaps because this conversation was 15 years ago, but the essence of the conversation is true as much as any 15-year-old memory is true. Okay? So it started, I don't know, we were after, I think he was pushing a tire, I think is what it was. We didn't have a Prowler, so I had people push heavy tires instead. But I think he was pushing a tire. And it was after a set, And he was like a little bit down. He was a little bit like emotionally down. And he said something to the tune of, he says, "I feel weird because all that I do is train while the other kids are out partying." What I said to him was, weird's just another word for different. Different means that you don't fit in, that you're not average, that you don't fall prey to average temptations or average bullshit. Different means that you think for yourself and don't give a fuck whether an arbitrary group of kids at your school think that you're normal. And then I added to that, I said, different's good. People who feel different when they're young often find out later that they were the ones who had it figured out and the rest of the world hadn't caught up yet. This didn't cheer him up. He was like, yeah, I guess. Yeah, a thing that teenagers do where they're like, just shut up, old man. I was like 23, but I was probably an old man to him. He was just not feeling it. I could sense that he didn't buy it. And I get it, because it's hard to recognize something, even if that something is true, if the opposite of that thing is what's in your face all of the time, if it's all that you see. And so I asked him, I said, what are the most popular kids from school doing right now? He said, they're probably out with friends drinking. There's a party tonight. We, of course, trained after school. And you're here at the gym, I responded. Tell me, is being different from them a good thing or a bad thing? He said, I just wish that I fit in more. Let's stop for a second. I just wish that I fit in more. I just wish that I did what the other kids were doing right now because they are the social world that I exist within. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's pretty hard to get out of that kind of mindset. Here is a kid who is the star athlete. I mean, he went to Chet, so he went to the basically the Jewish private school. He's actually one of the only Jewish NHL players as well. He went to Chet, he went to the Jewish private school. And he was, the best player by such a wide margin, it was silly. He went to the Maccabee Games, which was the Jewish Olympics, who represented Canada, won a gold medal. And then he, I don't remember what his stats were in, AAA, the highest level of hockey at that time. But he was the leading scorer by such a comically wide margin. And yet, he still wishes that he fit in more. So what I said to him is, I get that, man. Look, nothing that I can say will make you truly believe me. The stuff that other kids do and how they socialize is your normal because you're stuck going to that school. Once you become an adult, you get to decide where you spend your time and who you spend it with. And it's important to choose wisely. Shitty people with no work ethic who complain a lot and drink until they black out are people that you can choose to avoid. In the real world, you can design your life, and if those people still get you down, well, then that's your own damn fault. But as a kid, you're stuck. No matter what, for the rest of the year until you finish high school, you're going to have to see these kids every day, and it'll be impossible for you not to compare yourself to them. A piece of you will always wish that you belong more. Humans are dumb that way, I said. Our immediate surroundings become our reality. The emotional part of our lizard brain wants us to improve our perceived standing in whatever social group we happen to be in at that time. What you see is not all there is, obviously, but what you see becomes your reality even if it sets you down a negative path, and a part of you will always crave acceptance and power within that reality even if you know it's not good for you. It's dumb. High school dynamics don't matter. Right now, however, they matter to you because you're forced to be there, but once you graduate, you'll realize that it's nonsense. And this isn't just some adult saying this to a kid that his life doesn't matter. Adults get wrapped up into this nonsense too, and the worst part of it is that when they do, it's their own damn fault. Adults choose the prisons that they lock themselves into. They all own the key to get out. Some use those keys and escape, but most don't. I guess what I'm saying is that I understand being different is easier said than done, but keep working out. Don't make a big deal of it in school. It doesn't matter if you aren't the most popular kid in the petri dish you're forced into this year. What matters is what's going to happen when you get out. Because when you invest your time strengthening your body while others waste it away weakening themselves, you'll rise above. 5 to 10 years from now, those popular kids will be admiring you. I said, well, now this kid is the leading scorer in the NHL playoffs, going to the Stanley Cup Finals. I'll never forget that conversation because there was a lot of things that came up in that conversation when I was talking to him that I hadn't really thought about myself. But I think it starts, Amber, with understanding the responsibility of anybody who works with youth athletes. Something that we were taught a fair bit way back in the day. I don't know if people are still taught this. To not belittle them. To not make it seem like their problems don't matter. Like, you could look at this kid and think and say, you're the best athlete in the school. Everybody wants to be the best athlete in the school. Like, you're from Toronto and you're the star hockey player. Like, that's the sport, right? Like, you're the man. And yet he still had these feelings. And I think that they were perfectly reasonable feelings to have.
Definitely.
But they were only really feelings because he was stuck in a place that he was being forced into. And there's kind of no escaping it when you're stuck into a place like that. You will inevitably compare yourself to other people who happen to be in that same place, won't you?
Well, especially when you are excellent, right? Like, the amount of peers that you have is just smaller, right? Like, it's going to most likely be lonely. I mean, every person that I've ever talked to that is exceptional in some way often struggles with loneliness just because they don't have someone that they can communicate at the same level on a lot of things. So he's experiencing things that other kids are just never going to get, and then dealing with the attention and, the pressure that I'm sure he was probably under. And
he was under a lot of pressure for sure from his family particularly. And then what was interesting about him is that so I helped prep him for the NHL Combine. So basically like the physical combine. And then he ended up getting drafted out of high school by the Florida Panthers, I think it was. And he actually turned down his contract. So the way that hockey works is if you get drafted and you turn down your contract and decide to go to college, you basically become a free agent at the end of college and can sign with whatever team you want. But it's a risk because you turn down a contract and you don't know what's going to happen. And especially in a sport like that, you could get hurt. Or you might find out, as Zach did, that maybe he's not quite as good as he thought that he was yet. He went to college and got his ass handed to him. Just absolute, because he went to college and all of a sudden now every single kid was the best kid from their hometown.
Yeah. Now he has peers.
Now he has peers. And he got his ass handed to him. And he ended up actually completely transforming his game to the point where really up until like the first 3 years of college, he really was struggling. And then in fourth year, I think he won the Hobie Baker Award. I think he won the best college player. And then went and signed with the Maple Leafs and played with the Leafs for a while and then signed with Edmonton. But I think what I remember about this conversation so much and why it sticks in my memory is because of how foundational the problem is and how we might not be youth athletes. I was never good at sports. I certainly wasn't a competitive youth athlete. I'm certainly not a competitive adult athlete. But it's so common to compare ourselves to other people that are just present versus, I think, what really, really matters. I think that's why this conversation stuck. In his case, he had to go to school. There was no way to get out of it. There was no way for him to escape the classroom, the hallways. There was no way for him to escape the popular kids at school that were going out drinking until they were blackout drunk and having tons of time after school because they weren't training and playing hockey and all this kind of stuff. And he had to see it. And at least my opinion and what I've experienced with myself is that it's actually impossible for me not to compare myself to other people if I see those other people.
That's why
And
I
as
had to scrub my
adults,
social media. Like
what
all
did
when
you
I
have
was
to
doing
do?
coaching online, I
Mm,
got rid of I stopped following everyone that
interesting.
was an online coach or a coach in some capacity because it caused that comparison. So I had to
Right.
get rid of all of it.
And it becomes so easy to make up stories in our own heads, doesn't it, about how
Mm-hmm.
well the other person is doing. Meanwhile, we actually have no idea
Yep.
how well they're doing or how well they're not doing. And even if they are doing well, we should be happy for them because it's not a zero-sum game.
Yep.
But that comparison can really take us down. And so this this idea, I mean, I'm fairly certain I never used the analogy of adults choose the prisons that they lock themselves into. Like, I'm pretty sure I didn't use that metaphor. But I did say something like that to
Mm-hmm.
him back in the day because it's true. We do that, don't we? And the truth of the matter is, we all do have the keys to escape. Now, that's not downplaying that it is more difficult for some people to escape than others. Um, but I think at the end of the day, you choose what to expose yourself to. And the easiest thing is always going to be the thing that's going to be forced in front of your face. I mean, we had this conversation, him and I, before social media was really what it is now. But think about this in terms of social media. Think about the comparison that happens. Think about how much the stuff that's in front of your face, if you click on it, if you engage with it, you will see more of it and more divisive and more compelling versions of that thing. And it really is up to you to go out of your way to engage with things that you would not otherwise see to expand your horizons. I actually like paper magazines, for example, paper books. And I've designed a few ways to expose myself to ways of thinking and people and ideas that I have no idea what they're going to do for me in any way, but they just expose myself to different ways of thinking. So a couple years ago, I did a whole bunch of searches for the best print magazines that are out there. And like small indie print magazines, because a lot of them have been bought up now by Hearst, by a lot of these big
Sure.
companies.
Sure.
And I subscribed to all of these really obscure print magazines that do different types of investigative journalism. For example, there was one that I really liked. It was a magazine from the UK that got sent each quarter, so 4 times a year, and it focused itself on what they called slow journalism. So instead of the news cycles, turning over every day, every half day, every hour now, where
Oh.
basically if you're in the news business, you're in the impression business, you have to report on things earlier, faster, with less evidence than anybody else, and you don't know the whole story and you don't know what it means, but by that point it's too late. What this publication did is they said, we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to report on things a minimum of 4 months after they've happened.
I love it.
And give you the full story and also often the fallout. God, they uh their reporting on COVID was fascinating,
I bet.
for example. But this was a UK publication, so most of the things that they reported on dealt with stuff in the UK and stuff in Europe. We're very insular. Canada a little bit less than the States, but we're very insular in what we are exposed to in the news. I mean, I was just in Florida at the Legoland theme park with Calvin, and it was so funny. Like, the Americans, basically all the Americans I spoke to were from Florida. They drove there from Tampa or something like that. And it was just so funny. They're like, Toronto, Toronto. So do you like drive here from there, or is there a time change? Like Toronto was like the New York of Canada. You know what I'm saying? They
Yeah.
knew nothing, nothing about this country that shares like 1,000-mile border with it.
Yep.
I
It's
mean,
our hat.
it's a hat. I actually don't know how big the border is. I don't know if it's 1,000. It's a big border.
Yeah. Two to three
Yeah,
across
probably.
country.
And so magazines like that are just really, really interesting. The way that I find books, particularly fiction now, is when I'm looking for new fiction to read, I will actually look up the award winners of certain awards. So if I'm looking for sci-fi, I'll look up the Hugo Award winners, which is like the Sci-Fi Book Award. If I'm looking for more literature or narrative fiction or something like that, I'll look up the Pulitzer Prize winners. And I don't necessarily love them all, but what I'll do is I'll choose a random year. So I'll be like, what were the winners and runners up for the Pulitzer Prize in 2013? And then what I'll do is I'll download a sample on my Kindle, because samples on Kindle are free. I'll download a sample on my Kindle from each of those books. And sometimes I'll like it, sometimes I won't. But either way, I'm going to expose myself to something that is clearly great and beautiful in some way that I would never otherwise see. And then from that, they often, he's talking about this part of the world or this thing. It's like, oh, okay, well then you start going down this like Google rabbit hole of, okay, well it's fiction, but it's placed in a real world scenario often. And so what is it about that? So there are ways, I mean, that's how I do it. I'm not saying that's how you should do it, but there are ways you can kind of design into your life exposure to things that you wouldn't otherwise see, just to give you some different perspective so you don't get stuck into this trap of basically being forced into a high school petri dish that we all unconsciously would get stuck into if we're not careful. And we do hold the key to get out. But it's up to us to use it. You want to move on to this Reddit post?
Sure.
So tell me...
Jeff
Jackson. So he's a North Carolina politician. And what did he do? What did this post say?
So he was a member of the House of Representatives, and I think he's becoming the Attorney General, I think now, for North Carolina, if I remember correctly. But he was talking about earlier on in his political career where he went to some kind of like town hall kind of meeting. And
here, let me read it. Because he's a great writer.
Probably be better.
He's a great writer.
Is, yes.
So I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's quite long, but I'll read this part of it. He says, 2 years ago, I was campaigning for Congress in a small town just outside of Charlotte. I was talking to them about some big ideas, democracy, civility, things like that. And then I opened up questions, and a woman raised her hand. We need a new water pipeline, she said. You do? I said. She said, yeah, it's 80 years old and the main water line in our town. It's a real problem. And then other folks chimed in. Pretty soon I was getting an education about local subsurface infrastructure needs, their impact on clean water, and how they limit new affordable housing options. It says, after that I changed my speech. I talked about some big ideas, but I also started talking about water and sewer.
Mm-hmm.
So what's lesson number one?
So my favorite part about that section is how often as coaches we want to talk about sustainability and like all of these kind of almost intangible, hard to grasp concepts, like how like to relate to. But
fluffy,
like,
pie in the sky,
yes,
like nice sounding, meaningless,
just
superficial
need the water
words.
Pipeline. Yep.
Yeah.
So when people are complaining like, oh, I'm not getting any engagement, or nobody seems excited, or like they quit really soon or whatever, we're often thinking too big and grandiose instead of like, okay, like I just need a water pipeline. So that's my favorite part of that post.
What's the one thing that somebody thinks that they need in their own mind? Because that's where you're going to have to meet them at. Do you really think that people in, where did he say he was? In a small town just outside of Charlotte are going to vote for somebody in Congress because of their speech on civility?
Mm-hmm.
They have very immediate needs, don't they? And their immediate need is going to be very specific to whatever their problem is. There was something that Mark Zuckerberg said many, many years ago, when this was soon after they created the feed. So the Facebook feed. Because, Facebook used to just be a running feed, right? And then it became algorithmic and started the filter bubble and basically changed our world.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what Zuckerberg said soon after he created it. He said, "A squirrel dying in front of your house may be more relevant to your interests right now than people dying in Africa." That is an unbelievably callous thing to say. But goddamn, it's true, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
You'll never want to admit it in public that it's true. You'll want other people to think that you care about the greater world and the goods in the greater world and all of these things that we really do deep down believe matter. But you know what? There's this stinky ass dying squirrel in my front yard right now, and it smells, and I don't want to have diseases, and we need to deal with that first.
Mm-hmm.
There's this water sewage problem, and it's dirty, and we can't get enough affordable housing, and it's raising house prices, which is causing all of these other problems by us. And so we need better water treatment in our small town just outside of Charlotte. So I don't care, Mr. Congress fancy politics man, what you say about civility, about democracy. Fix a goddamn water pipe.
No.
And then we can talk to you about all
And if
that
you
other
can do
stuff.
that, you can earn the right to do the other things. Is you have to get them settled on that one thing first, and then you can earn the right to talk about the other stuff, and you might get their interest by earning their trust and their energy and attention.
Yeah. He said, so goes on, and he talks about how they were able to get it added to the budget.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "I asked my staff for the mayor's phone number and called to tell her the good news." He says, "That was a wonderful phone call to make." The mayor was overjoyed. Government had worked for this small town, and in a big way. He had made a real impact on that small town, way bigger than some grandiose political statements. So I think you hit the nail on the head, Amber. I don't have anything to add in terms of just why this matters to you and what you do. All of the things in your communities that you're in your Facebook groups, all of the nice sounding shit that everybody says, that everybody else likes and says, yeah, you go, deep health, yeah, longevity, yeah, this.
Yeah.
The people that you want to work with you are waking up in the morning and they're putting on their pants and they're saying, these feel tight. And then they're looking in the mirror and they're not liking what they see. And whether that's right or wrong or a good thing or a bad thing, kind of doesn't matter. Whether we like that or not, if you want to elicit change, you have to understand that this is the way that things are for the majority of people before you start working with them.
I remember when I first started working for you, and one of my first coaches that I was helping, and I wish I could remember who it was, but I remember the research or the language that they were using based off of their clients was regarding like the lines in your belly because your jeans were too tight. Like that was like an issue for their clients. It was like a husband-wife team, and they worked with women, and like they hated taking off their pants at the end of the day and seeing the lines, because they were wearing things that were too tight, and that was an uncomfortable reminder. And so just that very tiny detail, yeah, it was wonderful. We tend to think that that's not that big of a deal when we're on the outside. So it's hard for us to understand sometimes what our clients are really experiencing in those little trigger moments that create that deep dissatisfaction. But unless you're really digging for that information, then all you're left with is this grandiose concept that you're pitching instead of those detailed things.
Well, we'll talk about digging for that information. I think step number one is understanding that you want to gain that information, and so when it does come up naturally in conversation or you hear it somewhere else, you can identify it and make a note of it. Number one, we'll talk about digging for that information for sure. But there's a part of me that really wishes that it wasn't this way, and I think it's important to make that clear. particularly in fitness, where a lot of it is aesthetic, a lot of it is actually superficial stuff that doesn't really matter that much. Um, in fact, the physiques that we often look at that people think are like the best physiques in the world are actually really unhealthy physiques long term. You don't need to turn on the news for very long to watch another bodybuilder fall dead, which is really sad. But
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the state of it. But I would take the alternate spin on it, and I would actually say that a lot of what makes a great coach is the ability to empathize with their client. And I think when you use the words that they do, when you show them that you understand the deeper things that they're thinking and maybe not saying, like what you said about the lines, I think it was the lines in the stomach, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you do that, you're empathizing with them, aren't you? When you do that, what you're doing is you're showing them that you understand who they really are and that you care and that you recognize that this is a problem. Because a part of them probably even thinks that this is silly, that they think it's a problem, but it still bothers them.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of playing it off, like saying, those lines don't matter, like, what are you doing, Susan? You empathize with them. They do matter because they matter to that person. And so the part that jumped out to me was not actually what jumped out to you, Amber, about the
Mm-hmm.
first half of this. And it's the importance of going to where people are and actually having conversations with them. And you might go into it with a plan. In this case, Joe Jackson, I think, right? Jeff Jackson?
Jeff.
Jeff Jackson. In this case, Jeff Jackson had a plan. He had a speech. He was campaigning. He was on the campaign trail. He was going to these small towns because they do their research and they know where the swing votes are and they go to the towns where the swing votes are, right? It's not, everybody knows that that's what they're doing. But in speaking to these people, he opened up a platform for them to ask questions, which is probably relatively common in politics at town hall meetings, not so much in our world. But he listened. And then he shifted gears. And he acted with curiosity. So he didn't just, he was campaigning and he gave a speech or whatever it is, and then he asked for questions. And this woman puts up her hand. And she says, we need a new water pipeline. And he didn't do what most politicians would do, which would somehow spin that back into their agenda. Instead,
Mm-hmm.
he was curious. And I realized very quickly by the sounds of this post that that was the most pressing thing that a lot of people in the town were thinking about. And so we shifted the rest of the conversation to gathering information, to learning more about it, to showing them that he cared about what they cared about. And then the most important part. You want to know what the most important part is? He fucking did something about it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just lip service. He did something about it. And then the second half. A few weeks ago, we stopped by to do a check presentation for the project. My staff and I disagreed about this a little. I just wanted to give some remarks and didn't want to do the big novelty check thing. They insisted that the big check mattered, so I did it. And it turns out they were 100% right. I spoke and folks listened politely. But then the big check came out and bam, suddenly folks weren't just listening, they were smiling. Cameras came out. The memories were going to be from the big check, not from anything that I said. Lesson learned. The big check matters to a lot of people, so don't skip it. And then he says he can't show pictures from the event because ethics rules prevent it. And so he asked AI to recreate the scene. And the AI picture is a massive bear like growling and some guy in a suit like running with checks. So he was having fun with it. But
He loves playing with AI. He's funny.
yeah, fair enough. But what's cool about that is the Demented theater that big check provided, and how silly it is, but how big of an impact it makes. If you think about a lot of the businesses that really stand out in our world, a lot of what they do is Demented theater, is placebo, is benign bullshit. I don't think that that's a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think what he was giving with people, he gave the money. He was going to give the money either way. The budget, whatever. He was going to give either way. Clearly, you can't bring this check to the bank and deposit it. Like, everybody knows that. But what he did is he created a little bit of Demented theater, or what his aides recommended that he did, was he created a little bit of Demented theater in this small town that probably gets ignored a fair bit. I don't know what town it is, but a small town outside Charlotte, like, probably gets ignored by definitely bigger politicians. And he created a spectacle for them, and he showed them that they mattered. And he showed them that they mattered on a statewide scale and a national scale. That's powerful. It's important. There's lots of Demented theater in our world in different businesses. Think about, the most famous story of it is Red Bull. Right? Yeah. Red Bull's a tiny little can. That's Demented theater. They figured out that they can actually give you less liquid in a small can, because what you're then going to think is that this must be powerful stuff. Buckley's is cough syrup. Their tagline is, "It tastes awful, but it works." They could make it taste good. It's not very hard. All they need to do is put a little bit of flavoring in that thing. They could make it taste good. They purposefully make it taste bad and make that the keystone to the marketing. Because what we believe when we're sick is that medicine should taste bad. If we eat candy, like, my kids' medicine is basically candy, which actually creates problems because they always want it.
Flintstone vitamins. Yes, exactly.
Children's Tylenol.
Yep.
Tastes really, really good. You could do the exact same thing with Buckley's, couldn't it? But if we feel like we're sick, we trust something that tastes bad to make us feel better than something that tastes good. So I'll ask you, what kind of Demented theater can you add into your own business to that really is placebo, but that adds into the enjoyment? We did it with certificates for the Online Trainer Academy for years. And what we do now is, when you graduate the Online Trainer Academy, you get a digital certificate that's rendered for you, and you can download and print it. That's a certificate of completion, right? But before COVID basically messed up everything for us, and also made shipping rates just explode all around the world, what we actually did was we had printed these beautiful, thick stock certificates with the red metal foil, and they were signed by me. And then when you graduated, Alex went to a Kinko's once a week with every student that graduated, and he processed every single one of them hand by hand, writing in the name of the student who graduated. And then we shipped them out in this beautiful custom-made envelope that said, "Freedom is yours, now go grab it." And they were shipped very expensive, do not bend post all around the world. We spent like $50, $60, $70 to mail these things. These things will be over $100 to mail now. A certificate. But what we were doing was not giving you a certificate. What we were doing was giving you an opportunity to celebrate. What we was doing was giving you an opportunity to put this thing up on your wall, to get it framed, to have that moment where you worked hard on something and you're going to the mailbox and you see the red envelope sticking out of it and you know what it is because you're in the Facebook community and you see other people getting them and you've just been waiting for yours. And that's part of what's kind of been pulling you through to complete it. And you go and pick it up and everybody would be taking pictures and sharing it and celebrating themselves. Good for our business too, of course, right? Mm-hmm. But there were lots of little bits of Demented theater that we built in, even the textbook. You know? Could I deliver this? The Fundamentals of Online Training textbook as a PDF and not spend $40, $50 to print it and another 80 to 100 to ship it to wherever you are? 100%. And we do have that option now for the Online Trainer Academy because, again, COVID messed everything up. But I've shipped over 10,000 of these things around the world. Mm-hmm. How much money does that cost? Probably close to $1 million I've spent shipping textbooks around the world. Yeah. Printing and shipping textbooks around the world. Because when you have a textbook, you take your shit seriously. We have that ingrained into us. One of the things that we teach students in the Online Trainer Mentorship, most do it, not every single person does it, but we teach people how to send a really great welcome package to their new clients. And actually like FedEx it overnight to people. Because that's step one of the process. And isn't it nice to get something physical in the mail? And this is real. This is tangible. This is special. Of course you could send those documents as a PDF. Of course you could. It's a totally different conversation when you print it. When you print a big check, when you do all that stuff.
For me, that section of his post kind of highlights the importance of you need one easy takeaway, kind of like when we had the talk with Joey, right? Like when you're having a conversation, you need one thing that they can easily pull in, because the longer you talk, the more likely someone's going to start drifting off, no matter how good the talk is.
Sure.
It's just most likely to happen. But having something visual to pull attention back, to gain curiosity, and also to have a very simple understanding of what's happening, right? When we communicate, visuals obviously make the best things to use, right? So instead of doing a post on 10 different ways to do whatever, having a very simple single slide image that encapsulates the basics of that image, you're going to get way more engagement on that than a long post on it, just because it's easier to understand in a short period of time. So he did that kind of in a real world scenario.
It's a story. It's imagery associated with the story. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it just brings people back in. If he was losing them in the talk, it's an easy way to bring attention back in. And that's, of course, what everyone's going to talk about.
Is the big check.
The big moment, an aha moment, yeah.
Yeah. I had about an hour and a half conversation yesterday with the woman who is doing the interior design for the Obvious Choice book. And it was a great conversation. I'm really excited about the images that are going to be in there and the design and the feel. But we spoke about the cover, because the basically the cover comes first and then the interior design follows the kind of style of the cover. Like the subhead typography and everything is almost always the same typography as the cover, for example. A lot of things I'm learning. I didn't know that, but it makes sense that that's the way it is. And so we spoke about the cover, and we spoke about the whales and minnows imagery, because on the cover of the Obvious Choice book, which you can now pre-order on Amazon, of course, is there's the whale. There's what's it called when you fold paper? The
origami.
Yeah, there's an origami $100 bill folded as a whale, and then a bunch of tiny pennies that are little minnows that the whale is going after, right? And so, she spoke about potentially bringing that design into the text in some way, and we probably won't do it, but Um, I told her about kind of my mindset, my approach, and using that on the cover because the Obvious Choice book basically is 15 individual lessons. So it's not one big idea spread out over, it's going to be like 260 pages or so. It's not one big idea spread out over that. It's actually 15 different big ideas, one chapter each idea, all centered around a central theme that are connected. But you can actually read each idea independent of one another. And that's just how I wanted to design a book. I think that it's much better to go faster and knowing that, you know, a reader is not going to connect with every idea because we generally connect with things that are more present in our lives today than something else. But one of the things that I did, so that's great. But the problem with that, of course, is that because there's 15 big ideas, there's a lot of stories that could be there. And so I said to her, I was like, well, there needs to be one, right? The designs that HarperCollins came to me with, the original designs that they came to me with, all had to do with like arrows pointing into some central thing, like very obvious imagery of everything's pointing to you, right? Like get attention, like that type of thing. And that's fine, but I don't know, it's kind of boring. But the reason why I really didn't like that is because there's no story, there's nothing there. There needs to be, like you said, one thing that somebody is going to be able, and somebody else says, hey, what are you reading? Oh, it's this book called The Obvious Choice. Oh, what's it about? It needs to be really easy for them to connect to one story, to one idea that they could pick up and say, oh, it's about this. Like if I want to design word of mouth, you have to design at least one, what my friend Clay Hebert calls portable stories that somebody picks up and moves on. So the big check is that. Right? For me, in The Obvious Choice, I chose Whales and Minnows to be that portable story. There could have been others, you know, and I think that there probably will be others that people will connect onto based off of kind of what they need at that time. But you're right, we need one.
We can create add a page for instructions on how to do an origami whale.
Yeah, that'd be funny, wouldn't it? Allison said she could figure it out pretty quick.
I'm sure.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. It's kind of grab bag, but I feel like both themes were pretty connected to one another. I wanted to recommend another episode to you in case you wanted something else to listen to. Maybe you're not done quite doing the dishes or your walk or cardio or however you listen to us in the car. And so check out episode 207. You'll have to scroll back a little bit. The title of the episode is Managing Outside Disruptions to Your Business. Now, disruptions could be big disruptions, like something personal, could be health, could be something outside of your control, like COVID-19 happening way back when, right? Way back when now. Or it could be something day to day, like kid gets sick, and that's going to be a 2-day disruption to your business, for example. And I think it's very important that you build a business that can not only withstand but thrive when there are inevitable disruptions to your day to day. Because if you build systems that only work when conditions are perfect, they're going to break. But if you build systems for times when conditions are not perfect, they're also going to work when things are perfect, probably better. And then you're still going to be able to thrive and keep with it when inevitably something comes up. So check that out, episode 207. Hope that you enjoy it. Len, I hope your gums are okay. You old man, you. We missed you, man. Thanks for listening.